Good evening, everybody. So I'd like to warmly welcome you to another instalment of our Enlightening Minds lecture series, where our aim is to inspire and nurture curiosity across the whole King's community. Thank you very much for joining us, either in person or online this evening. So I do have a bit of practical business before we get started. There's no fire drill expected, so if there is a fire alarm, please enter or exit through the fire exits to your left, and we will convene on the first 15 rugby pitch. So we are delighted to put these on for our King's community. Thank you to everybody who has supported our bursary programme when booking your ticket. Retrospectively, you can still support the bursary scheme, so please do if you can. Every gift makes and means an awful lot to our community. It makes a huge difference to the lives of our pupils and families here. So there'll be a Q&A at the end of the talk, and those who are watching online, please use hashtag KCS Enlightening Minds on x.com, so we will monitor that throughout the evening and ask questions. So it's now my pleasure to introduce someone I've been lucky enough to call a friend for more than a decade. Rob Gardner is a visionary leader whose work sits at the intersection of finance, sustainability, and social impact. Rob started his career in investment banking at Merrill Lynch and Deutsche Bank, and in 2006 he co-founded Reddington and Mallow Street and was the co-CEO for over a decade. He then joined St James's Place Wealth Management as their Director of Investments, and alongside his day jobs, Rob has dedicated an enormous amount of time to non-profits, raising millions of pounds for Cancer Research UK, campaigning for our young people to improve financial literacy in schools, and founding Red Star, a financial wellbeing charity with the aim of teaching 1 million young people how to budget, save, invest, and give back. Rob's next chapter in his entrepreneurial career is as co-founder of Rebalance Earth, and Rob is helping to build a new system that rewards communities for protecting nature, proving that environmental restoration and economic opportunity can go hand in hand. And I'm excited to hear all about it. Please join me in welcoming Rob.
Can you hear me okay? So I want you to think about when you woke up this morning. I woke up, I get out, check my phone for a line bike, jump on a line bike, head to Barn Station, jump on a train to Waterloo, buy myself a copy, go to work. Actually, when I came here just now, I got on Uber from Wimbledon Station. Now, the point about all of those things, in fact, this school, is infrastructure that we need. All of those things needed investing. I'm guessing some of the parents here wish they'd invested in Uber when it had launched, but everything that we do, everything that we rely on for our day-to-day lives requires investing. As you just heard, I spent 25 years of my career investing other people's money to build stuff, investing in companies, investing in properties, investing in bonds. But I think there's a new asset class, an asset class that has been completely overlooked, and that is nature. And to make that point, as well as my coffee and my Uber, we all need water. And just up the road is Copper Mills, run by Thames Water. It costs millions of pounds to build, costs millions of pounds to run every day, and it cleans 500 million litres of water a day, which is about a third of London's drinking water needs. If that goes down, within 7 minutes, London doesn't have any clean water. We just invested in this oyster reef, the largest oyster reef in Europe. It cleans 800 million litres of water a day for free and grows and regenerates. Doesn't need any electricity, doesn't need any chemicals. It's just nature. Not only that, oyster reefs are the nurseries for all of our fish in the North Sea. Now, it turns out that we all need fish to eat. If you've got a pet, if you've got a cat, your cat food probably depends on the fish in the North Sea. So in the same way that the buildings that we go to work in, I work in a WeWorks, pay my rent, we get paid by Nestle to ensure that there's enough fish in the North Sea to make their cat food, to make their pet food, to sell to us, to clean the water, to take the nutrients out of all the pesticides and fertilizers that come off the farms and go into the sea. This is literally living infrastructure that has been designed and evolved over 4 billion years, but in our current economic system, we don't value it. And I want to leave today with you with this idea that we need to be investing a lot more in nature. But before I do that, I want to tell you about my friend Sarah. I've known Sarah a long time. And about 15 years ago, she moved to Monmouth to start a business. Not every company needs to be listed on the stock exchange. She started a nursery, and a few hundred families depend on that nursery being there. I'm sure some of you parents, some of you experience dropping off your kids at nursery. Without a nursery, we can't function. She has built that business over 15 years and is a key part of the community. But sadly, last November, it rained, and rained, and rained. And you all know what happened next. Monmouth was flooded. The banks burst, and water flew into her nursery. The paintings on the wall were destroyed, the furniture destroyed. She immediately got out her phone and texted all the parents and said, the nursery's closed for further notice. In the weeks that follow, the council bills went up by millions of pounds. Her business closed down. Other businesses in Monmouth closed down. And that's just a microcosm of our economy. And this is happening up and down the country. And the new baseline, the new reality is this, that since she started her business 15 years ago, the extreme rainfall that we got in November, the extreme rainfall that we got just in January and February, is happening 5 times more than just 15 years ago. That is the new normal. That means the M5 is going to be flooded, the M6 is going to be flooded, Network Rail's flooded, people can't get to work. Just this week, a new report's come out talking about how people can't get a new mortgage on their homes. So we are kind of locked in this paradigm. But it doesn't have to be this way, because people saw it differently and said, well, yes, we've got climate change, but part of the reason why it flooded in Monmouth is that we straightened and canalized all of our rivers. We've degraded our soil of the very thing that makes it healthy, so it can't store any water. We've removed our trees, our hedgerows, our landscape that supports everything that we do is degraded and broken. And these 2 farmers thought, we don't need to live like this, facing these problems. We can do things differently. And if we do things differently here, we can solve the problem not just in the UK, but the rest of the world. So just 60 miles from Monmouth, 2 farmers called Tim and Tim, during COVID, had a different idea. They observed the flooding of the railway line. They saw the combined sewage overflows of Thames water pumping raw sewage into the rivers and said, what if we changed the way we farm? What if we started investing in our landscape in the same way that we invest in our infrastructure? And they thought, well, actually, if we could build a model where we farm differently, we use less pesticides, we use less fertilizers, and we focus on soil health, not only will our food be healthier, not only will that soil store more carbon and more organic matter, but it will store more water. What if we took those rivers that have been straightened and canalized and re-wiggled them? What if we restored the wetlands? What if we restored the peatlands at the top of the catchment? What if this became a healthy catchment? And what if we could invest in a healthy catchment in the same way that we invest in Uber, in the same way we invest in line bikes, in the same way that we invest in property? And so this is where a new model has been born, one of landscape recovery, where pension funds invest their money to restore the catchment, to do all of those things that we've described. And when we do it, this small catchment just near Oxford can now store 1 billion cubic meters more of water than before. That flattens the hydraulic curve. It reduces the flooding to Network Rail. It reduces the flooding to the district substations that impact everyone's power. It stops or reduces the storm overflows. And not only that, when the land is healthy, it starts to work like a water treatment plant, because a water treatment plant is just a filtration process. The water can now filter slowly through the soil. The rivers now have riffles in them. The water gets aerated. There's less pesticides and less fertilizer. And it arrives in Thames water and doesn't need to be cleaned as much. All of a sudden, we have created a new economic model where instead of building stuff, we're restoring nature. Instead of cutting nature down as a commodity, we're paying for nature's ecosystem services. And when we do that, we turn it into an asset class. And by making it an asset class, we can get our pension funds to invest in it. The crazy thing is that most people don't realize that here in the UK, we have the second largest pensions and wealth management market in the world. It's over £5 trillion. It will become £10 trillion in the next decade. It's bigger than our GDP. And so we can just invest a small amount of that money to restore our catchments. And when we do that, not only do we create a better outcome for the farmers, one where they get paid fairly for their work, where they might have more resilience, we reduce the risk to people's homes, we ensure that people can get to work on the train and drive on the roads. Candidly, our food tastes better, and we improve our lifestyle. So why wouldn't we invest in nature as an asset class? So I just kind of want to leave you with this thing, because I think we face two futures. We face the future, and this is the path that we're on, that Sarah and Monmouth is in right now, where we've got climate change, precipitation is increasing, flooding is increasing, drought is increasing, and we have a degraded landscape. And I promise you there will be more nurseries going under, there will be more small and medium enterprise businesses going under, there will be more homes that are uninsurable. That is the path that we're on. But the cool thing about being us is we have a choice. And we have a model that works over here. We can follow the model of Tim and Tim and say, well, what if we invested in nature's infrastructure? What if we improved our landscape, ensured that we had the right water in the right place, of the right quality, in the right way? And if we do that, we can ensure that the UK becomes the fastest nature recovering country in the world. And if we do that, we can inspire other countries to do the same and become a world worth living in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'd just like to remind people watching from online, if you'd like to ask a question online, then hashtag KCS Enlightened Minds. Thank you.
So the question just before, while others are thinking of questions to ask, is you talked about making nature an asset class. How exactly, in order to get large firms to want to cooperate with this, how do you make this profitable for like the individuals investing within it, given that nature is something that's universally accessible to all people?
Yeah, so I think that any asset class needs to have one or more of the following three characteristics. So it needs to have scarcity, utility, and cash flow. So brands like Chanel and Rolex understand that if I can control scarcity, I can control price, and that's how they make money. Utility, if I invest in a building, I need to be able to use it. Can I use it as a school? Can I use it as a shopping center? Can I use it as office spaces? And then cash flow, how do I derive money from that? So as I said earlier, our offices in the WeWorks, we pay rent. Now, let's say if we use property as an analogy, if I was to take a Four Seasons hotel and move it out of London and let's say put it in Milton Keynes, that business has less value because people aren't going to pay as much to put it there. So in my view, all businesses, whether it's investing in a company, investing in a property, investing in infrastructure, relies on you joining that. Now, you can invest in nature, but up until now, it's really been as a commodity. We grow it and we cut it down. The food we eat, the wood to build this atrium is basically a commodity. And we can do it in a sustainable way, in a renewable way. The cool thing about nature is it literally converts the energy from the sun with water and oxygen and nutrients in the soil into plants, vegetation and food, etc. But what we haven't done is started treating nature as infrastructure. So that oyster reef, there's 4 million oysters, they're not for eating. They won't be harvested and sold in a restaurant in London. They are there to live, reproduce, and grow. And I say, right now, those 4 million oysters are cleaning 800 million litres of water. They're increasing the marine biodiversity and supporting about 17 key fish species in the North Sea that are fundamental to businesses like Nestlé and anyone else who relies on healthy fish in the sea. And for that, Nestlé will pay us money. And that money then gets paid back to the fund, and that fund then gets paid to our investors.
Perfect, thank you. Would anybody like to ask any questions? I think we'll just pass the mic around.
Really interesting talk, thank you. How feasible do you reckon it would be to scale this up to, say, investing in an entire region of the country, to say we make this a massive nature reserve, and would that make money?
So the question is, could this be scaled up? How big could it be scaled up, and how feasible? So when I started Rebalance Earth, I get asked two questions: who pays and why, which is really the last question, and the second is, can it be scaled up? So that catchment project that I just told you requires about £160 million worth of money. About 70% of that will come from government and about 30% from private, so £50 million. I think the UK, to stop what happened in Monmouth over the next 10 years, needs about £100 billion. There are over 56 catchments, landscape recovery projects like those, and Evenlode was just a baby catchment. It was a bit of a mise-bouche. To restore the Wash probably requires about 500 million to 700 million pounds. So to make this really work, we need to do this at a catchment scale. If you think about it, the Evenlode is just one tiny tributary of the Thames. So to restore the Thames probably requires about 50 billion pounds if you added all of the Evenlode catchments that make up the Thames catchment. And then, the exciting thing is that this works anywhere where you have aging infrastructure, where you have dense populations, where you have degraded catchments, and you have strong rule of law, which basically means all of Western Europe. So this is a €2 trillion opportunity in Europe. And I was just literally speaking to a French bank today to say, how can you come to France and deliver this model? And next month, I've been invited to Washington to speak at the World Bank and IMF to talk about how do you scale this model as a kind of new way of financing nature across the planet.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions from the floor?
Thank you very much. Obviously, kind of the purpose of this differs slightly from a traditional investment firm or asset manager. I'm just curious, what do returns look like in comparison to other sorts of asset management and hedge funds? And would you say it's as profitable for an outside investor, or would you say it's more you have a return, but you also kind of have the feeling of kind of doing something positive?
So the question was about what rates of return do you get? This is kind of different from other asset managers. Is this because you're trying to sort of maximize profit, or because you're trying to get other benefits? So this is designed for UK pension funds, local government pension schemes, defined contribution like Nest or Scottish Widows that you or I are invested in. So we need to meet 4 criteria. So the first is the rate of return. So we're generating a rate of return that is north of 10% net of fees. So if you're a pension fund, which is where I spent sort of 20 years of my career, they want to be selling their growth assets like equities, where they're typically expecting sort of more than 7% to invest in this. So this is not a de-risking trade, point 1. Point 2, if you're an asset owner, you don't just invest in one asset class. There's this principle called diversification. So right now, many asset owners are worried about having all of their assets basically exposed to the US stock market and tech. So diversification is really key. The correlation of those returns is correlated to oysters cleaning water. That is completely uncorrelated to whether NVIDIA launches a new chip or not. 3 is this concept called portfolio reflexivity, which is, in ordinary things, if I have a portfolio of investments, it's sometimes worth paying for a little bit of protection. Let's say if I own a house, I pay for insurance. This, if you think about it, most pension funds lend money to United Utilities. They invest in the supermarkets of Tesco's and Sainsbury's. They have shares in Nestle. So just a small investment in this starts to protect the other assets. So that's the third benefit. And then the fourth benefit is this thing called place-based impact. So if you're the West Yorkshire Pension Fund, you kind of like investing in stuff in your area. If you're UK pension funds, you want to invest in the British Isles and coastal waters. So that's that's how it stacks up. It's really returns, it's diversification, it's this concept called portfolio reflexivity, and place-based impact.
Any other questions? I think there's one from online.
Rob, combining two of your passions, this and educating young people, is there a future where young people can invest in nature?
Yeah, look, at the moment, it's really local government pension schemes that are investing. There are a few defined contribution pension funds that are investing, so some of these students, when they leave university, will probably be enrolled in a pension. Our goal is to make it available to everyone. We've got these structures in the UK called LTAFs, long-term asset funds, but really, it's not going to be that long before this is available in your ISA on Hargreaves Lansdown or anything else.
It's a great idea. It would be wonderful if something like this can happen, because I think it's what we really need. But if you sort of invested in an area and reduce the flood risk, obviously that can have a really wide impact at a lesser and lesser degree as you go further away. For example, say in Monmouth, lots of businesses are affected, the railway line's affected. How do you persuade everyone who benefits from it to pay? Because that's kind of what you need. Yes, that Nestle is paying for that oyster farm. Maybe that's a more specific link. But it's not like renting out a building to a business where they get a specific, clear product. It's like, well, yeah, we like that idea, we'd love you to do it, but we're not going to pay for it. So how do you persuade them to pay?
So the question was really about the benefits are spread across many people. It's this idea of the free rider problem, so how do you coordinate those things? Two things, both of those things have happened. They're live. They're making money there. So these aren't conceptual ideas. They're ideas that have been done or are being done. You're right. The oyster reef for Nestle is a lot easier. That's a bilateral transaction of value. All of it has to be around exchange of value. To make a catchment recovery, you need either three circles of a Venn diagram or three parts of a triangle. So you need to align the landowners, the sort of farmers and the farming cluster, or it might be National Trust or RSPB, to say, you used to do this, can we do that? You then need to have enough economic value, enough network rails, enough water utilities, enough factories at risk, and then you need to have the pension fund capital available. Now, the pension fund money is not philanthropic. This is not concessionary capital. So unless we deliver the 10% rate of return that we talked about earlier, you can't close the loop. What is interesting is that we have built a map of the whole of the UK, and we've come up with what's called an economic value and a catchment complexity score. So an economic value is like the value of all residential property, the value of all commercial property, infrastructure density, so like the proportion of roads and railways and substations per, let's say, square kilometre, as a sort of proxy for economic value. And then what we call catchment complexity, which is how hard or easy is it to restore the land. So London would be 5 on economic, but it's also 5 on catchment complexity. You might go to places like Cumbria, where unfortunately there's not enough economic value to make the model work. The catchment complexity is low, but you can't make it work. So this idea doesn't work everywhere in the UK is the reality. But that is the economic model. It is just identifying the biggest payers in that area to say, you've got value at risk, and coordinating it. And once we aggregate enough of them, and as long as we can hit the 10% rate of returns, then we can go ahead and transact. So we've got 3 more lined up for next year, and we plan to do 10 the year after. I think the free rider problem goes away. I think it's going to be the other way. I think councils are going to be calling up and go, why can't we have one of these in our catchment? And then if there's a major player who's not playing ball, then it will just be known to the council and everyone who lives there and go, you could have one of these, but it's not happening because this big company over here doesn't want to play ball. I think at that point, they lose their kind of social license to operate. No.
Yes, I want to build on the question from my distinguished friend to my right here. That, notwithstanding what I think I understood you explain in response to an earlier question, if I'm a pension fund and I have made an investment through your company in an assetized bundle linked to everything you've described, and it's generating, what did you say, a 10% return, I'm trying to understand what it is that gives me assurance that it will continue. Where's that return coming from? Because for most assets, they're valuable either because something somewhere is throwing off cash, and in this case, you've got the problem of capturing the value. Even if you're generating value, there's a problem with capture. Or the underlying asset is becoming rarer or more valuable. So why are these assets that the pension funds may buy becoming more valuable over time? If anything, as you're successful, maybe more of them are coming onto the market, so they'll become less scarce. Where's that 10% return come from? What's generating it?
So the question is, if the first question was about how do you capture the value, is how do you kind of generate those returns and keep those returns? You're right. Normally in investing, I buy something today and I buy it for 100 and I want to sell it for 300 in 5 years' time. So I need another buyer to buy that. Or I can buy something for 100 and then it gives me a series of cash flows that pays me back, and I don't get a repayment of 100 at the end, but I get a series of amortizing cash flows that pays me that. The fund that we're doing is exactly that. So when we invest in these projects, we're looking to sign up to a contract that says, if we store 1 billion litres of water, and that's valuable to you and your business, and your operating and maintenance costs of running your railway line have collapsed, if you're being fined £750,000 every time it floods, if that's gone down, will you pay us for that? And then we agree you'll pay us X million a year for 15 years. And then to the previous question, I need to line up enough of you so that then they stack up, and then effectively our investment has a series of these cash flows going through. And that's how we make our rate of return. To the scarcity point, this is a place-based thing, so it only works in this catchment. If I need to go to another catchment, it needs the investment there, and it doesn't change the value of the even load catchment, because in all of these things, the value is derived by the people who are in that catchment. So, for example, a different water utility couldn't care less whether that's been restored. Only Thames Water gets value from that. So it's not like, isn't it nice if a river's been restored? Likewise, if I took that oyster reef and I took it out of the North Sea in Norfolk and then put it the other side of Ireland, it would be worthless, because all of the fish and the marine biodiversity that Nestle is paying for is coming from the North Sea. So it's very sort of place-based context.
Thank you. Thank you, that was really fascinating, and to me it just sounds like such a win-win scenario. What can we do? So I'm a teacher, so I get my pension through the TPA. What can we do to ensure that our pension funds are investing in things like this? I mean, I remember years ago, there was a campaign about the TPA not investing in arms. Can we create something that actually there's an alternative? This is what we want you to be investing in. Like, as a normal person on the street, what can I do about that?
So the question is, as someone who has a pension, what can I do? And it's such a great question. I think the first thing is definitely write to either your HR provider or your pension and ask sort of 3 questions. 1 is, how do climate and nature-related risks impact our portfolio? 2, are you investing in natural capital? It doesn't have to be this. It can be sustainable forestry. It can be sustainable agriculture. It doesn't have to be in the UK. And 3, if not, why not? I would say a significant amount of local government pension schemes have said they want to allocate 3 to 5% to this. You've got Norges, the largest pension fund in the world, saying that if we don't do this, this is a strategic risk to all of our investments. You've got Scottish Widows that has over £100 billion in assets. I'd be amazed if someone in this room or in there doesn't have their pension with Scottish Widows. They ran a report to show that water-related risks are the biggest risks in your portfolio. So just to sort of recap, definitely email and say, how are you looking at climate and nature-related risks in our portfolio? How does it impact all of my investments? 2, are we invested in natural capital? And 3, if not, why not?
If we have time for one more question, I have one to ask. Yeah, so regarding this, right, we're combining nature to try and drive profit and value. Does this actually benefit the environment for the better? And if so, what role does the government play in this? Because we've mainly been talking about the private sector here. Does the government play a role in making this more efficient, in sort of actually providing their own funds to make this better, given also the underlying issues with the free rider problem and rivalry and stuff like that?
That's a good question. Is that your question?
That's from me.
That's a very good question. So, yes, when we invest, we have what's called a 4 returns framework. So 1 is financial returns. Are we generating the 10% or more, and diversification and all the stuff you'd expect to go to that. 2, are we generating nature-related returns? So that oyster reef, we have done more for restoring nature in our oceans with that one transaction than the British government has done cumulatively since World War II, just from that one transaction. We have restored more oysters than every other oyster reef restoration project in the whole of Europe through this model. Storing a billion cubic meters of water, for those of you who do physics, go and work out how many liters of water that is, hopefully relatively easy. That is a lot of water. You need to build a lot of water treatment tanks to be able to store that much water. This is going to be removing 400,000 kilograms of phosphorus from our soils. It's going to be sequestering thousands and thousands of tons of carbon. It's going to be increasing organic matter. We're going to be increasing mean species abundance, more worms, more insects. So yes, restoring nature is absolutely a key thing, but actually social returns is important. Are we creating new jobs? We use local crab fishermen to go and deploy that. Actually, we're improving the catch for those local crabs, so we're actually making their business more resilient and not even being paid for that. But that, again, creates a local social license to operate. Also, oyster reefs, I haven't talked about it, they are amazing at dampening wave energy, so they reduce coastal erosion, so it actually protects the coastline and people's homes. So social returns are really important. And then sort of 4th is this idea called inspirational returns, which is, can we inspire other people to do the same? Can we create a repeatable, scalable model? We just want people to go and copy this and do this as quickly as possible, whether it's in France, in Spain, in Germany, in Australia, in South Africa, in Brazil. Pick up a good idea, apply it in a contextually relevant way. There was another question.
Regarding the government's role in this and whether that would make it more efficient.
Yeah, so earlier I was asked a question and I talked about this sort of triangle, the sort of landowners, the sort of buyers of these ecosystem services and the capital providers. All of this happened within a context of government and government policy. So government policy can be both an enabler or a disabler. In the UK, we have what's called DEFRA, we have the Environment Agency, we have Natural England, we then have Ofwat, we have Ofgem. I spent a disordinate amount of my time trying to organize policy to make it possible to do those things. Now, 15 years ago, when we wanted to start offshore wind, government set up what is called contracts for difference, where they incentivized it and made it easy for banks and pension funds to invest in offshore wind. And 15 years ago, I was getting some of my pension fund clients to invest in it. Now, as obvious as that is today, 15 years ago, the idea of taking pension fund money, having a lease from the Crown Estate, getting someone to build a wind turbine and put it and turn wind into power and make a return from that, I promise you 15 years ago, that was a pretty crazy idea. Today, it is a huge business. It's easy to finance. It's pretty standard. But that took a change in government policy. For the government to do the same, we need to work with Ofwat to encourage water utilities who spend, that's going to spend £100 billion in the next price review. So why can't they spend 30, 50% of that on nature-based solutions? So that's just examples. So government is incredibly important. But in that model, the cool thing is they actually spend less. So from a government perspective, £1 of taxpayers' money goes a lot further. Because otherwise they'd have to pay the cost of all that flood protection, which, by the way, the government in the UK doesn't have enough to do.
Thank you.
Did you want me to do the part two? So part two was, it pains me to say this, it's 26 years since I started as a graduate, and so it was just to share some career lessons, some career reflections. As Anthony said, we've known each other a long time. So a little bit about me. I studied geography at university. I love geography, and I specialized in hydrology and glaciology, and I was part of the Alpine Glacier Project that has been collecting glacier data for the last 50 years. You might understand maybe why I'm doing what I'm doing. So the idea of the environment, human geography, physical geography, how they relate is incredibly important to me. My mum and dad were both teachers, and I was born in Holland, I lived in Argentina, my parents lived in the Middle East, and I'll be honest, I just wanted to earn a lot of money. And so when I was at university, I went to the milk round, and there were these things called investment banks. I'd never heard of I thought a bank was HSBC or Barclays. I'd never heard of Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch or Goldman Sachs. As an aside, when I grew up in Argentina, by the age of 7, I knew the exchange rate of every currency in South America to the US dollar. And my first girlfriend, her dad ran a bureau de change in France pre the euro, and so in the summer holidays I used to go and work, and people would come in with French francs and Deutschmarks, and sorry, not with French francs, I was in France, with pounds and Deutschmarks and lira and pesetas, and I'd exchange it and then turn them back. And so with that, I managed to convince Deutsche Bank to give me a job, and I started working in global foreign exchange, and I loved it. The energy, the FX markets are the biggest, most transacted market in the world. And working at Deutsche Bank was an incredible experience. I learned how to price and value swaps, how to discount cash flows, stuff that is absolutely critical for what I do today. And then I was hired by Dawed to go and work at Merrill Lynch, and we started working with pension funds and insurance companies and thinking about long-dated transactions. And it was through that I got my passion for pensions. And so 20 years ago, almost to the day, I retired from Merrill Lynch, because I got to keep my shares, which is really important. And Dawed and I co-founded Reddington, a pensions consultancy. And so from scratch, in my bedroom, and his attic, we built Reddington, and I've got some stuff on that. And founded another business called Mallow Street, founded a charity called Red Start, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I then went to join St. James's Place, and I run their entire investment division and was kind of brought in to turn their investment proposition around. I left when it was about £158 billion, because we just launched a new fund at COP26, and aligned with climate, and it was very much focused on energy transition and electrification, but nothing around nature. And then a friend of mine from uni sent me a photo of the glacier that I'd worked on, and 200 meters of ice, where I used to drill a borehole, had gone. 50% of glacier mass balance had gone in 25 years. That wasn't meant to happen in 200 years. That happened in 25 years. And as cliche as it sounds, I've got 2 girls. I didn't want to ask myself, when I'm 55, what did I do? And I thought, actually, I know how pension funds work. I know how assets work. I know how to price and value derivatives. What if we could make nature an investable asset class? But the thing that has underpinned everything that I've done is this idea of kind of purpose beyond money. So when we set up Reddington, we had this idea that we said, we wanted to do to pensions what Jamie Oliver had done for school food, and that probably doesn't mean anything to some of the people in this room. But 20 years ago, Jamie Oliver was very famous because he wanted to change the way at school we thought about food, because it turned out that a lot of young people don't really know where their food comes from. And actually just simple changes in behavior could change the health of our darts. The same is true for pensions. If I say pensions, you're like, oh my God, that's really boring. It may be boring, but it is incredibly important. And so if we can help shift people's behaviors, we can really transform people's financial futures. And so the purpose of Reddington was, what if we could help 100 million people be financially secure? And linked to that, not only were we helping pension funds to protect themselves, I thought, what can Reddington do to give back? So many companies do stuff to give back, and I wanted to do something that was related to what we did. And so in 2012 in the UK, this new thing came out called auto-enrollment, which doesn't mean anything, but what it means is that we now had a two-tier pension system. People before 2012 had what's called a final salary pension fund, which means you go to work, you work for 40 years, and you stop work, and you get paid 2/3 of your pension for the rest of your life. If you have one of those, it is incredibly valuable. It is also incredibly expensive and unaffordable for the company and the government. So in 2012, they said, stop that, we'll put you into what's called defined contribution, which is as you're working, right now you only put 8%, unless you work for a company that puts in more, for retirement. By the way, to have even a chance of a comfortable retirement, it needs to be more like 15%. We thought, this is really interesting. Most people don't have a clue about money. We're not taught about money at school. And I was very lucky because in Argentina, I experienced inflation running at 30% a month. Prices changed every day. You go to the supermarket and they change the price. Whilst I was there 4 years, my dad's salary devalued 4,000%. You didn't put money in the bank. At the end of the month, we'd leave school, St. Andrew's Scott School in Buenos Aires. We get into our car and we drive up to a house that looked like something out of Narcos. There were Dobermans, there were metal bars. My dad would get out of the car, walk up, the dogs would be, and he'd take his pesetas, his pesos or Australes, I mean, the currency changed so many times while we were there, and exchange it illegally for US dollars. We'd then go home, and then we'd all sit around, I was 7 years old, and we'd roll up those US dollars into the old 35mm canister films, and we'd hide them around the house. It was safer to do that than put your money in the bank, which is why at the age of 7, I knew the exchange rate of every currency in South America to the US dollar. We also were a very weird middle class that didn't exist in Argentina. They were either extremely wealthy or extremely poor. And I used to collect the Coca-Cola bottles and the Fanta bottles from the older boys and girls, and I'd take it and come home with money. So anyway, I thought this was perfectly normal. Surely every 7-year-old understands inflation, knows foreign exchange, knows the idea of going and earning money. When I got to university at Oxford, there were some really smart boys and girls. They had no idea about how to earn money, how to keep money, or how to grow money. And unfortunately for my mum and dad, no one had taught them the magic of compound interest. No one had taught them that you could invest in companies like Google and so forth. They just put all their money in the bank. And as interest rates came down, then the rest. So we started a charity called Red Start, where we want to teach young people, primary school kids, how to earn money, how to keep money, and how to grow it. Last year, we delivered that to 60,000 boys and girls across the country, in London, in Edinburgh, in Newcastle, in Lowestoft. King's College London is doing a baseline study to evidence that, and we used that to get the government to change policy last year to put financial education on the primary school syllabus. And then last year, we merged Red Start with my bank to form Money Ready, which is now the largest provider of financial education, or what we call financial fluency, from 4 to 40. So it doesn't matter if you're 4 years old, 11 years old, you're in social care, you're 35, we're helping provide people financial education that is relevant so that they can feel confident and in control about money. So purpose is something that is incredibly important to me. But stepping back from purpose, my purpose when I left uni was to earn money, and that's okay. I think it's important to be sort of on it. The problem with sort of saying about sort of purpose, but what I would say is love what you do and do what you love. I really, really enjoyed my time at Deutsche Bank and Merrill Lynch, especially in those early days. It was definitely a work-hard culture. There were definitely some things about that weren't quite right 25 years ago, but broadly I worked with some extremely smart people working on some really interesting stuff, and that's incredibly energizing. So my first sort of piece of advice is love what you do and do what you love, because it's hard to get out of bed if you don't do that. My second thing is, and this is my secret hack, This is kind of the mantra that I have lived by. Anyone here who is a musician, a sports person, judging by the number of people who got A's and A stars at A-level last year, this is probably speaking to the converted. But the secret to success is not swinging for the fences, but it's this very simple idea that ordinary things, consistently done, create extraordinary results. If you want to be a great actor or actress, practice your lines. If you want to be great at tennis, you've got to hit thousands of shots. If you want to be great at music, whatever you do, persistent focus. And by the way, there are ups and downs. It is not guaranteed it is always a straight line. But it's why that old adage is that it normally takes 10 to 20 years to be an overnight success. And then thirdly, life's too short. Have fun. Surround yourself by amazing people, people who lift you up. When times are tough, that you can have a laugh. I think that's really important. And I found that whenever I've worked with people who have fun, it's just much more enjoyable going to work. So those are my 3 career lessons. With any questions? Did that resonate? I'd love to know if any of the mums or dads in the room have similar thoughts or reflections.
Thank you. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, how is it different to create a business in a very nascent field like environmental as a natural asset compared to a very well-established industry?
Yeah, it's a lot harder doing what I'm doing now than... So when I started Reddington, you're right, we were an investment consultancy. And so typically when you start a new business, either your insight is you're doing it better than someone else, but that's easier to do because people were already buying investment consultancy services, so we just needed to come up with a new product or service and say, why was our product or service better? Here, we're coming up with a brand new idea that has never been done before, and then you have all of the other challenges of being a startup brand that no one's ever heard of before. So, yeah, it's a lot harder doing this.
Any other questions, or I'll ask one quickly. Did you face any setbacks while, creating your own business?
All the time, every day, and that's why having fun. I mean, just when we were setting up Rebalance Earth, we just 2 years ago, we were doing our first angel round. We got debanked, so we just raised some money, but we couldn't actually get any money in. We got screwed over by our law firm. That's probably a more recent thing. I mean, in the early days of Reddington, just too many to count on. And I think the hardest thing, in order to do ordinary things consistently, you need an enormous amount of willpower to be able to get out of bed, especially when it's, metaphorically speaking, rainy and really tough. And that's why you need to be surrounded by a good co-founder, a good team, to keep you going. I would say, look, we all live a myth. If you follow me on LinkedIn, it looks like everything is rosy. That's because I only post the stuff that is really rosy. Life looks like this. Every single time you set off doing that, and it looks like that. And when you're down here and when you're here, you've got to find a way to keep going.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, so you mentioned recent angel investors investing. At the beginning, where did most of your funds come from? Did they come from VC or people that you knew? How did you exactly get started? And how much did you stake for yourself? Was this sort of considering the high risk of starting a company, were you sort of this is all in for me, or did you hedge a bit?
So in 25 years of working, I've gone 5 years without earning a penny. So very few people are prepared. When I left Merrill Lynch, I quit my job. My mum and dad thought, what on earth are you doing? I mean, they literally called me up and said, Rob, what are you doing? I'd just been promoted. I think I was the youngest director ever at Merrill Lynch. And I went 2.5 years without earning any money when I first started at Reddington. With Rebalance Earth, the bulk of it is what's called sweat equity, so you work for free. So you need to have enough money saved, back to the earn it, keep it, grow it, so you can live your lifestyle, pay your mortgage, pay your insurance, to keep going. But then, I've invested some of my money, and then I know people now obviously I'm a lot older now than when I founded Reddington. I was 27 years old, so I was a baby. I didn't know anyone, and there it was just hustle muscle, just get down and run it. And the difference, the first business, Reddington, is what's called a customer-funded model. So you kind of go, you win business, you make some profit, and then you reinvest that profit, and you grow and you expand. With the business I've founded now, I've got to convince people of a big idea and raise money, and then use that money to create a runway to get there. So they're kind of two different types of entrepreneurial journey.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Thank you so much. This probably goes back to the first talk, or sort of first part of the talk you were giving, but you talked a lot about hydrology. I just wondered if there are any other aspects of sort of nature asset classes, if we're defining them as such, that you think are particularly investable.
Yeah, I mean, look, the main asset class that people invest in at the moment, and it's a huge business, is obviously forestry and agriculture, right? You know, all of, you know, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, all invest in farmland. The other bit that's sort of been tried to take off but stalled a bit is kind of carbon credits, so planting trees and getting paid for carbon. More and more pension funds are investing in forestry and sustainable forestry, and more are investing in trying to change the way we farm. You know, olive farms in Spain, how to be more climate resilient. The idea that we're implementing here candidly works anywhere in the world. It's just, it'll be slightly different in Australia to Canada.
Perfect, thank you. What an amazing journey, and I think everyone can agree that it was an amazing talk, so a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.